Scary telling. When my mother died, my siblings and I were left with the overwhelming task of cleaning out the house she'd been hoarding in for over 4 decades. The house was filled to the brim with piles of junk, newspapers, and trash, and the stench of rotting food and animal excrement was overpowering. Despite the enormity of the task ahead of us, we set to work, donning masks and gloves to protect ourselves from the filth. As we sifted through the clutter, we found evidence of my father's disappearance all those years ago. It seemed he had never left, but had instead been trapped within the walls of our hoarder mother's home. In one of the back bedrooms, we discovered a small crawl space hidden behind a bookshelf. We had never noticed it before, but upon further inspection, we found that it had been blocked off with stacks of old magazines and boxes. As we moved the debris out of the way, we heard a faint scratching sound coming from within the walls. We assumed it was just rats, but as we cleared the last of the clutter, we saw a small hole in the wall. I shined my flashlight into the hole and saw a pair of eyes staring back at me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as I stared back, I saw a face. It was my father, emaciated and covered in filth, but alive. We broke through the wall and pulled him out, amazed that he had survived all those years trapped in the hoarder's house. As we hugged him, he whispered something in my ear that chilled me to the bone. "He's still in there," my father said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's been waiting for us to find him." We all looked at each other in confusion, not knowing what he meant. But before we could ask any questions, we heard a loud thump coming from the direction of the crawl space. We cautiously made our way back to the room, our hearts pounding with fear. As we approached the crawl space, we saw something moving inside. At first, we thought it was just more rats, but as we got closer, we saw that it was a figure, covered in filth and grime. It was a man, but not like any man we had ever seen before. He was skeletal and covered in sores, his eyes sunken and hollow. As we stared in horror, the figure began to move, slowly crawling towards us. We tried to back away, but our feet seemed rooted to the spot. The smell of death and decay filled the room, and we realized that the hoarder's house had a dark secret. The figure reached out to us, his fingers long and bony, his mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. As we backed away, we saw that he was not alone. Dozens of other figures emerged from the walls, each one more terrifying than the last. We ran for our lives, but the hoarder's house seemed to have a life of its own. The doors slammed shut, trapping us inside, and we could hear the scratching and scraping of the creatures on the other side. We were trapped, with no way out. The hoarder's house had claimed us, just as it had claimed our father all those years ago. We were doomed to spend the rest of our lives in the darkness, surrounded by the horrors that lurked within its walls. And as we screamed and cried out for help, we knew that no one would ever hear us. The hoarder's house had become our tomb, and we were doomed to spend eternity in its grip. I had always wondered why my parents forbade me from opening the basement door. They had told me that it was for my own safety, but I could never shake the feeling that there was more to the story. One day, when they were out of town, my curiosity got the best of me. I made my way down to the basement, my heart racing with excitement and fear. I turned the doorknob slowly, and as the door creaked open, I saw a sight that I would never forget. There was a strange, glowing ball in the sky, hovering just above the trees. It was pulsing with an eerie light, and I felt drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on the glowing orb, and as I got closer, I felt a searing pain in my eyes. I stumbled back, my hands covering my face, and I could feel tears streaming down my cheeks. The pain was unbearable, and I knew that I had made a terrible mistake. As I stumbled back up the stairs, I heard a voice whispering in my ear. It was a voice that I had never heard before, and it chilled me to the bone. "Come back," the voice whispered. "Come back and see the truth." I shook my head, trying to clear the voice from my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Over the next few days, I felt my mind slipping away from me. I would hear voices in my head, telling me to do things that I knew were wrong. I couldn't focus on anything, and I found myself drawn back to the basement door, time and time again. The glowing orb was still there, pulsing with a hypnotic light, and I knew that I had to find out more about it. I tried to resist the urge to go back, but it was like a magnet, pulling me towards it. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I snuck out of my room and made my way down to the basement. As I opened the door, I saw that the glowing orb had grown larger, and the light was more intense than ever before. I took a step closer, and I felt the familiar pain in my eyes. But this time, it didn't stop. The pain grew and grew, until it felt like my eyeballs were on fire. I screamed out in agony, but the voice in my head was stronger than ever. "Embrace it," the voice whispered. "Embrace the light." I tried to fight back, but it was like a switch had been flipped in my brain. I felt myself slipping away, lost in the hypnotic light of the orb. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My parents were there, looking down at me with tears in their eyes. They told me that I had been found unconscious in the basement, and that they had no idea what had happened to me. But I knew the truth. I had been drawn into the light, into a world that I could never escape from. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, I felt myself slipping away, lost in the endless glow of the orb. And I knew that I would never be the same again. The basement door had opened a portal to a world beyond our own, a world of darkness and light, where nothing was as it seemed. And I was trapped, forever lost in the glow of the orb. I always hated the sound of crickets outside the lonely farmhouse I inherited from my grandfather. It was too quiet out here in the middle of nowhere, and the crickets seemed to amplify the silence. But now, every time they go silent, I know that thing is passing by, and I pray for them to chirp again. It started a few months ago when I began to notice the crickets suddenly stop chirping for minutes at a time. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, or maybe the crickets had gone quiet because of the cold weather. But then, I noticed that every time the crickets went silent, there was a strange presence outside. At first, I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I could feel its gaze on me. It was like something was watching me from the shadows, and I could feel its malevolent intent. Then, I began to see glimpses of it, a shadow that seemed to move without sound, and a pair of glowing eyes that shone in the dark. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, but the crickets going silent became more frequent, and I started to feel like I was being stalked. The thing would circle the house, tapping on the windows and doors, trying to find a way inside. I could hear its claws scratching at the wood, and sometimes I could feel the house shake from its weight. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I tried calling the police, but they didn't take me seriously. They said it was probably just a wild animal or a trick of the light. But I knew what I saw, and I knew it wasn't natural. The thing grew bolder with each passing night. It started leaving signs, claw marks on the walls, and animal carcasses on the porch. I was trapped inside my own home, afraid to leave, and afraid of what was waiting for me outside. Then, One night, as the crickets went silent once again, I heard a voice calling out to me from the darkness. It was a voice I recognized, my grandfather's. He had passed away years ago, but his voice was clear as day. "Open the door," he said. "Let me in." I froze, not sure what to do. The voice sounded like my grandfather, but I knew he was dead. The thing outside was trying to trick me, trying to find a way inside. The crickets started chirping again, and I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my grandfather's old shotgun, the one he kept hidden under the bed, and I waited by the door. I could hear the thing outside, growling and scratching at the wood, trying to break in. Then, with a sudden burst of strength, the thing broke through the door, and I saw it for the first time. It was a creature, part animal, part demon, with razor-sharp claws and teeth, and eyes that glowed like fire. I aimed the shotgun and pulled the trigger, and the creature fell back, screaming in pain. I ran outside, knowing that the thing wouldn't be able to follow me. I looked back at the farmhouse, now engulfed in flames. I had set it on fire to destroy the creature and everything it had touched. As I watched the farmhouse burn, I realized that the crickets had started chirping again, and I knew that I was finally safe. But even now, as I sit in my new home, far away from that lonely farmhouse, I can't help but wonder if the thing is still out there, waiting in the darkness, and listening for the silence of the crickets. I always knew that my job as a mortician was a strange one. Handling dead bodies every day wasn't for everyone, but it paid well, and I was good at it. However, nothing could have prepared me for the horror that awaited me one night. I had just finished embalming a body and was on my way out of the funeral home when I was attacked from behind. The last thing I remember was being hit over the head and falling to the ground. When I woke up, I couldn't move. I was in a small, cramped space, and I realized with a sickening feeling that I had been buried alive. Panic set in as I struggled to free myself, but I was trapped. As the minutes turned into hours, I started to feel my air supply running low. I knew that I didn't have much time left, and my thoughts turned to my family and friends. I would never see them again. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of someone else breathing. I wasn't alone in my own grave. I tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but I was still trapped. And then, I felt a hand on my arm. It was cold and clammy, and I knew it wasn't my own. I tried to pull away, but the hand tightened its grip. And then, I felt another hand, and another. They were all around me, grabbing and pulling at me. I was surrounded by the dead. I could feel their breath on my face, and I could hear their moans and whispers. They were trying to drag me down with them, to make me one of them. I don't know how long I was down there, but eventually, I passed out. When I woke up again, I was lying in a hospital bed. The doctors told me that I had been rescued just in time, and that I had been lucky to survive. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt violated, traumatized, and haunted. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the faces of the dead, and I could feel their hands on my skin. To this day, I still have nightmares about that night. And I can never forget that being buried alive was bad enough, but realizing that I wasn't alone in my own grave was worse. I had been excited for my blind date all week. My friends had set us up, and I couldn't wait to meet this guy. He seemed funny and charming over text, and we had made plans to go see a movie. When he texted me that he had finally arrived, I checked my phone and saw that it had been exactly 15 minutes since our agreed upon meeting time. I quickly replied, telling him that I was waiting outside my apartment building and to let me know when he pulled up. A few minutes later, I saw a car pull up to the curb. I assumed it was my date, so I walked over and got in the passenger seat. As soon as I sat down, I noticed something was off. The man driving the car was not the guy from the photos my friend had shown me. He looked similar, but there was something different about him. He had the same hair and eye color, but his smile was different. It was almost as if he was trying to imitate the other guy. I didn't know what to do. Should I say something? Or just go along with it? I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt and see how the date went. We started driving, and he apologized for being 15 minutes late. But I couldn't help but feel confused. We had already been driving for 10 minutes. How could he have been 15 minutes late? As we talked, I noticed more and more differences between this guy and the one I was supposed to be meeting. He had different interests and opinions, and his sense of humor was not at all what I had expected. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm sorry," I said. "Are you sure you're the guy I was supposed to be meeting?" He just smiled and nodded. "Of course, I am. Why do you ask?" I didn't know how to respond, so I just went along with it. But the more time we spent together, the more I realized that something was seriously wrong. When we got to the movie theater, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I washed my hands, I looked up in the mirror and saw someone standing behind me. It was the guy from the photos, the one I was supposed to be meeting. My heart raced as I turned around to face him. "Who are you?" I asked. He just smiled and shook his head. "Don't worry about it. Just know that the guy you're with is not who you think he is." I didn't know what to do. Who was this guy? And why was he impersonating my date? When I got back to the theater, the guy I was with was acting strange. He kept glancing around nervously and wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I realized that he knew that I knew something was wrong. I excused myself to go to the bathroom again, but instead, I called a friend to come pick me up. When I came out of the bathroom, the guy was nowhere to be seen. As I walked outside to wait for my friend, I saw the other guy standing across the street. He just smiled and waved, then turned and walked away. I never saw either of them again, but the memory of that night has haunted me ever since. Who was the guy who impersonated my date? And why did he do it? I may never know, but I do know one thing: I will never go on a blind date again.